Imagine, you're alone in a farmhouse outside Delaware, Ohio, on a humid August night in 1977. The cornfields are whispering, your radio begins to crackle, and for a few haunting seconds, every electronic device in your home hums with a sound you've never heard before. It's not music. It's not static. It's something beneath the static, rhythmic, pulsing, like a machine trying to imitate breath. And then silence. But the silence is heavier now, as if something had passed through you, unseen, undetected, until now. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribe, like, comment, and share this story. Now, let's continue with the story. August 17th, 1977. 2 days after the WOW signal was detected, the early morning sky over central Ohio was thick with mist and radio silence. The Big Ear telescope at Ohio State had already made headlines among SETI researchers, but another signal, far stranger and infinitely more disturbing, was picked up not by scientists but by accident. Lyle Carson, a doctoral student working night hours for extra credits, was reviewing calibration data in the auxiliary monitoring room beneath the university's electromagnetic lab. The small, windowless chamber smelled of hot plastic and ozone. The equipment was outdated, analog, held together with silver tape and stubborn faith. Just after 2:50 a.m., a low chime buzzed on one of the spectrum monitors. It shouldn't have. That line hadn't recorded anything in over 4 years. But there it was, an irregular cluster of frequencies, flickering in tight intervals like blinking Morse code. Lyle leaned closer, heart hammering, fingers reaching for the reel recorder. A chill passed through the room, like a cold breath exhaled from nowhere. The signal pulsed for 3 minutes and 56 seconds. It was not steady like the WOW signal. It jumped and throbbed, split into 3 subbands, and then dipped into something he swore wasn't random. He printed the spectrogram and circled a segment that looked disturbingly like a repeating sequence. When the signal cut off, the room went dark. Not power failure, not overload, just off. The systems rebooted 45 seconds later. No logs captured the downtime. Lyle backed up the signal onto a magnetic tape and labeled it Delta Echo 3. As dawn crept over the campus, he locked the tape in a desk drawer and wrote a single sentence in his lab journal. Structure detected. Possible scan. Source unknown. He didn't tell his advisor. He didn't trust him. Instead, he drove north into Berkshire Township to find answers. He had heard rumors from janitors and groundskeepers. Talk of a Cold War radar installation, hidden beneath old grain silos, just beyond the tree line. And from the moment he arrived at the silo gates, his life began to unwind. Lyle Carson stood alone on a gravel road that vanished into the edge of Berkshire's forgotten farmland. The map he'd sketched from a Vietnam veteran turned groundskeeper led him to a derelict grain silo flanked by 2 others, leaning slightly under the weight of time. But one thing didn't belong: thick steel hinges on a reinforced side door, hidden behind overgrown grass. And above it, faint but unmistakable, was a weather-worn emblem. A triangle inside a circle, military but unfamiliar. It was past 10 a.m. now. The sun pierced the gray skies in slanted beams, warming the topsoil but doing little to ease the tension in Lyle's chest. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was dry and stale, saturated with the scent of dust and rust. The walls were lined with thick cables and analog instruments coated in years of decay. But some of it, just some, still had power. A humming noise echoed faintly, as if something deep beneath the silo had never stopped running. Lyle moved slowly, flashlight in hand. He descended a narrow iron staircase into a sub-basement. The steps creaked beneath his boots, the echo spiraling downward. The walls here were not concrete. They were lined with lead panels and old antenna mesh, part of a low-frequency interference cage used in mid-century signal tests. At the bottom, a room opened into darkness, silent, cavernous, and not on any blueprint he could find. In its center sat a half-buried terminal, a clunky reel machine connected to a dusty control panel. The dials were twitching, slowly, in rhythm. Lyle powered the terminal and inserted his tape marked Delta Echo 3. As it played, the dials began to pulse and sync. The machine reacted to the signal. It recognized it. Suddenly, a red light on the wall flickered on, labeled in chipped lettering. Proximity echo. The signal wasn't being received. It was being reflected back. Something somewhere had heard it. Lyle stumbled backward. He stared at the panel, trying to understand. Then the lights blinked off. The terminal began to rewind the tape automatically. A static voice cut through the speaker. Not English. Not any language he knew. But the cadence was unmistakably intentional, like a synthesized whisper pressing just beneath the threshold of comprehension. And then, a single phrase emerged in recognizable form, synthesized through layered frequencies. Remaining link. Continue scan. The silence that followed was absolute. Lyle ran from the silo. He didn't even lock the door behind him. That night, in his dorm, he mapped the coordinates of the signal's peak strength and realized something impossible. The echo had moved in a spiral pattern over a 70-mile radius, tightening like a noose around central Ohio. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. The area had been scanned, then scanned again, and now it was focusing in. The next night, the skies over Ohio burned with a dull crimson hue that no one could explain. It wasn't aurora. It wasn't lightning. The air was too still. No storms. No wind. Just a pulsing smear of red low on the horizon, like heat bleeding through the fabric of the world. Lyle Carson was driving west, heading toward an old weather station once used by the Air Force, just beyond Radnor Township. He had traced the trajectory of the signal, each spiral orbit, each tightening frequency cluster, and found the centroid of the pattern. Whatever had responded to his tape, it was converging here. He hadn't slept. He hadn't told anyone. The university wouldn't listen, and his fellow researchers had already labeled him fixated, ever since he withdrew from the SETI observation team last spring. But Lyle knew, this wasn't just a curiosity. Something real was mapping the electromagnetic silence of rural Ohio, and it was growing more precise. As he neared the station, he saw a woman standing by a broken-down pickup on the side of the road. Her name was Marianne Duval, a local radio host who ran a paranormal talk show out of a garage studio. She flagged him down, pale and shaken. "Did you see it?" she whispered. "The red arc." Lyle's mouth went dry. "What arc?" She pointed toward the sky, nothing visible now, but then reached into her glove compartment and handed him a cassette recorder. She had caught it on AM band, just 30 minutes ago. He played it. The tape hissed, then clicked. Then a sound emerged, slow, distorted, like violin strings being stretched underwater. The tone was modulated, familiar, and then the same cadence, the same breathless echo. It matched his Delta 3 waveform perfectly. "I've been tracking this signal for a year," Marian said, voice trembling. "It comes every August, always during this week, always near the same frequency range. The red light, it follows it. It's like it's looking for something." Lyle's pulse quickened. Or someone. They drove together to the station. It was long abandoned, rusted antenna towers, collapsing roofs. But the internal servers still had a small backup generator. Marianne had access through an old ham radio club, and within minutes, they had powered up an ancient signal analyzer. Lyle loaded the tape. The waveform appeared. Shaky, unstable, but real. And then it corrected itself, as if recognizing the hardware. The screen flickered. A new line of data appeared, cycling across the feed in jagged Morse bursts. Sector locked. Verify life signal. The building suddenly filled with low-frequency hum, vibrating the floors, rattling loose nails in the walls. Outside, the trees stood deathly still. No insects. No wind. Just the droning pulse of something vast passing through the atmosphere, unseen and unwelcome. Lyle stared at the screen. Whatever had been listening had now found them, and it was closing in. The morning after the red arc, towns across Delaware County awoke to a strange hush. Radios refused to pick up stations. Televisions displayed nothing but thick, rolling static. Cordless phones emitted a faint high-pitched tone, just beyond hearing range for most adults, but unbearable to children and dogs. In the diner on State Route 203, the regulars sat staring at their silent screens, forks hovering midair. The town's police scanners were dead. Weather alerts didn't go out. And beneath it all, no one could hear the usual drone of electricity. No hum of refrigerators, no flicker from old neon signs. The town wasn't just quiet. It was unplugged. Lyle and Marian didn't go home. They spent the night in the weather station's basement, too shaken to sleep. When the hum faded just before sunrise, Lyle checked the signal logs. A new entry had appeared at 4:12 a.m., completely unsolicited. Signal path complete. Synchronization ready. He stared at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just an echo anymore. It was a protocol, a sequence escalating with purpose. Marianne took the tape and drove back to her home studio. She planned to broadcast a segment that night, warning listeners about what she had seen. But when she turned on her equipment, the signal analyzer froze. The lights dimmed. Then the frequency reappeared, by itself. But this time it spoke her name. Synthesized through distortion, crackling with modulation, the word Marianne echoed 3 times through her headset. Her hands shook as she turned off the entire grid. The frequency dropped, and once again, silence returned. That night, across 3 counties, sightings were reported of a red ellipse in the sky. Low, oval-shaped, and completely soundless. A farmer in Richwood said it hovered over his barn for nearly 2 minutes. His cows stopped moving. His clocks reset. Marianne called Lyle. "I didn't say anything on air. It doesn't matter anymore. It's already here." Back at the university, Lyle retrieved one last piece of restricted data. An archived telemetry report from 1963 labeled Echo Experiment. Suppressed return. It outlined a classified project that involved sending controlled low-bandwidth pulses into space. But the final log entry had been blacked out. Only a timestamp remained, August 17th, and a single line, handwritten in the margin. Should not have answered. It now knows Earth's rhythm. That was over a decade ago. And now it was happening again. Not randomly, not as a flare or burst, but as a return path. And the target was narrowing. Lyle sat in his dorm, blinds drawn, the faint blue of the monitor casting long shadows across the floor. The spectrogram looped endlessly, each repetition reinforcing a terrifying conclusion. The signal wasn't just interacting with equipment. It was anticipating behavior. It mimicked frequencies Lyle hadn't yet played. It responded to files he hadn't yet loaded. Something within it watched. At 2:53 a.m., the exact timestamp of the original Delta 3 echo, his screen went black. The machine rebooted without prompt. Then slowly, a waveform drew itself onto the display. It pulsed in 5 clean intervals, identical to the signal from the silo. Only this time, something new appeared beneath the wave, a faint watermark, a string of numbers, a set of coordinates. They pointed to an isolated patch of forest north of Alum Creek Lake. He didn't wait. He grabbed a reel-to-reel recorder, a flashlight, and a shortwave receiver, and drove. Fog clung low to the roads. Trees bent slightly inward as if listening. He turned onto a gravel path half lost to overgrowth, headlights bouncing off gnarled trunks and yellowed reflectors cracked by time. The location wasn't marked. No towers, no fences. But there was something unnatural, a feeling, as if the air had changed weight. Lyle exited the car, the receiver in his hand starting to tick. Then hum, then scream with interference. The forest floor trembled slightly underfoot. In a shallow clearing, he found what looked like a collapsed satellite dish. Its surface fractured, embedded deep into the soil like it had been pressed there from above. Around its rim were fragments of old communication hardware, half-melted, corroded with an oily black film. And next to it, propped against a moss-covered panel, was a photograph. A black and white image of 6 men in Air Force uniforms. One of them was holding a clipboard. Another had a hand on what looked like a control terminal nearly identical to the one in the Berkshire silo. Scrawled across the back in faded blue ink, Echo Array Recovery Team, August 1963, do not distribute. Lyle snapped a picture, heart pounding. This wasn't just a theory anymore. There had been previous contact. They had detected this before, documented it, buried it, and whatever it was, it had come back. He heard footsteps behind him. He spun around. Nothing. The receiver screamed again, then cut off. His flashlight flickered, and in the space between breaths, the air folded in on itself, dense, silent, and charged. He looked up. Above the tree line hovered a shape that shouldn't exist. Mathematically smooth matte black, with 3 soft, rotating red lights along its underbelly. It didn't shimmer. It didn't emit light. It absorbed everything around it, like a hole torn through the atmosphere itself. Lyle fell to the ground. Not from fear, from pressure, a vibration in his bones, as if the entire frequency of his body was being calibrated. And then, one final word came through the receiver. Not spoken, not broadcast, Injected. Synchronizing. The shape vanished without motion, gone between heartbeats. And the signal went silent. But Lyle knew it hadn't ended. It had only locked in. By the time Lyle returned to campus, dawn had broken over Ohio like a pale warning. The usual buzz of morning life was absent. No distant lawnmowers, no early traffic, not even birdsong. The only sound was the low whir of the campus ventilation system and the brittle crunch of his shoes on concrete. He went straight to the university's archival building, an old, seldom-used annex behind the physics department. With the help of a borrowed key and access badge, Lyle descended into the records vault, searching for one name that had surfaced in both the echo array photograph and the 1963 logs: Major Alton Reeve. The man had overseen telemetry for the defunct Cold War echo experiment, which was supposedly dismantled before SETI even began operations at Big Ear. But in the lowest drawer of the classified materials cabinet, Lyle found a thick binder labeled Receiver Anomaly Reports, 1962 to 1964. He opened it. Inside were hundreds of pages, each bearing strange entries. Unscheduled transmissions, interrupted training signals recorded pulses with human speech cadence. One log described a brief voice transmission received through an unpowered receiver. The transcript simply read, "Phase initiated. Pattern locked. Awaiting reply." Taped to the final page was a yellowed field memo signed by Major Reeve, dated August 20th, 1963. Following transmission reception, both echo hardware and backup receivers registered thermal spikes. Localized vibration detected in ground-based antenna supports. Electromagnetic feedback loop resembled biological resonance. Recommend facility shutdown. Erase echo ID from project registry. No contact must continue. Below in pen. They are not responding. They are listening. Lyle sat back in his chair, stunned. The signal he'd recorded in 1977 was not unprecedented. It was a return attempt. And worse, his replaying of Delta Echo 3 in the Berkshire terminal had likely triggered whatever failsafe the echo array was designed to avoid. He returned to his lab and pulled the tape again. This time, he played it through a digital converter and layered it over the 1963 recording preserved in the files. The waveforms matched. Not partially, perfectly. The frequency had not changed in 14 years. It had not degraded, evolved, or shifted. It had simply waited. And now it was in sync. Marianne called him later that night, breathless. She had gone to record a new episode of her radio show, only to find her transmitter locked in a continuous loop, broadcasting an old episode she never produced. In the recording, she was asking questions she had never spoken. Questions about the signal, about the 1963 team, about him. It ended with her voice whispering, "Lyle Carson is echo positive. Proceed to integration." She pulled the power cord. The studio went dark, and still the signal played on. That night, Lyle sat motionless in his lab, staring at the flickering screen, trying to slow his breathing. Outside, the sky had turned a sickly hue, cloudless, windless, pale like old bone. No students walked the sidewalks. The university felt evacuated, though no such order had been given. The data stream was no longer behaving like signal playback. It was evolving, mutating. A new line of code began etching itself across the screen in rhythmic intervals. One character every 2 seconds, like keystrokes from an unseen hand. Phase 3, neurosynchronic resonance. Lyle leaned forward, muttering the phrase aloud. As soon as he did, the fluorescent light above him flickered, and the waveform on screen shifted from sinusoidal to jagged. The signal reacted to his voice. He tried again, Phase 3. The hum beneath the building deepened, a low vibration that tingled in his teeth. His jaw clenched involuntarily. His muscles tensed, and behind his eyes pulsed a sharp ache, as though his thoughts were being tuned. Panicked, he yanked the power from the machine. Silence. The air snapped back like elastic. The vibration stopped, but only for a moment. Then, without any electrical input, the reel-to-reel tape started spinning. His hands shook as he stepped back. The waveform was now forming not on the screen, but on the oscilloscope beside it, self-powered. A perfect delta spike, pulsing once every 5 seconds. And then his name appeared on the screen again. Lyle Carson, sync level 83%. Integration imminent. He fled the lab, heart pounding, chest tight. He drove aimlessly for hours, trying to escape the reach of the signal. But it was never about proximity. It had already embedded itself in the recording, in his memory, in his voice. Back at Marianne's house, she had isolated one frame from her broadcast recording, slowing it down to analyze the vocal tone that mimicked her own voice. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was her speech pattern, layered with another signal, another cadence, matching Lyle's tape. The voice was hers, but filled with inflections she had never used, modulated with impossible precision, forming a message not spoken but measured. The message wasn't in the words. It was in the timing, the intervals, the delay between breaths. Lyle recognized it, a scan pattern, the same protocol he had noticed in Delta 3. The system had used their voices as templates, broadcast shells to deliver and refine resonance. It was constructing something, a neurological overlay, a mirrored pattern of human consciousness. They weren't being watched. They were being recorded, modeled, duplicated. Lyle looked at Marianne. It's trying to rewrite us, from the inside out. Her face was pale. And what happens when it finishes? In the distance, they heard a siren warble once, then distort into a shriek of tones that rose and fell like laughter. Lyle whispered, "Then it won't need the signal anymore," because by then, the signal would be in them. 2 days passed. The outside world carried on, unaware. But in a 10-mile radius around the Berkshire site, subtle changes had begun. Neighbors began speaking in clipped, halting tones. A mother at a gas station greeted her own child by repeating the name twice, like an echo unsure of its sound. A shop owner turned on his weather radio only to hear a robotic version of himself announcing a forecast he'd never recorded. And the animals had started disappearing. Marianne noticed it first. Birdsong, once loud and constant outside her home, had vanished. Her dog, Bella, stopped responding to her voice. She just stood at the door, staring at the empty sky. Lyle remained in hiding, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. The waveform, the delta spikes, the voice shaped like his own, whispering thoughts he hadn't yet had. His dreams were no longer his. They came prearranged, as though projected through some invisible channel. By now, the university had revoked his lab access. They cited unauthorized equipment use, but Lyle suspected the real reason. They'd seen the tape. They knew something was wrong. He met Marianne in the basement of a fire-damaged library on the edge of town. There, surrounded by cracked microfilm readers and damp books, she played back a file she'd intercepted through a pirated digital uplink. The signal had gone global. Repeating bursts of delta pattern resonance were being picked up in Australia, Chile, northern Russia. Each region reported its own anomalies: disoriented livestock, atmospheric disturbances, strange flashes of red light above forests and coastlines. Yet no governments responded. No media reported it. "It's not about where the signal reaches," Marianne said. "It's about who can receive it." Lyle's voice was hollow. "Who's already been prepared?" That's when they discovered the final piece. In the folder recovered from the university archive, tucked behind the official reports, was an internal memo marked with a red stamp. Echo Integration Phase, Long-Term Host Viability Study. Dated 1964. Signed by Major Reeve. The memo outlined psychological monitoring of participants exposed to early signal tests. The result: a 3% segment of the population showed signs of neural resonance, an unconscious alignment with the waveform's pulse pattern, dreams in sync, emotional echo, speech delay, temporal drift. They were called respondents. The final page included Lyle's name, alongside a sample recording. It had been taken the day he was born. His mother had given birth at a field clinic less than 5 miles from the Echo installation during its final active year. He hadn't just discovered the signal. He had always carried it. Lyle sat motionless, staring at the yellowed memo, hands trembling. The air in the basement felt heavier now, like the walls were leaning inward. His name, typed in faded ink among the list of respondents, burned into his memory. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a design. "I was born into this," he whispered. Marianne's voice shook. "They've been waiting for you. For all of you." She flipped through the remaining documents. Names, dates, locations, mapped across decades. All of them within the 1963 signal arc. All children born within a specific 4-month window. Most lived normal lives. But there were reports, disappearances, sudden catatonia, unexplained suicides. A network of test subjects. Not contacted, but cultivated. "We're not the target," Lyle said slowly. "We're the transmission medium. The pattern wasn't broadcasting outward anymore. It was bouncing between minds, thoughts, memories. The signal had shifted from machine resonance to biological relay. That night, they drove to the outskirts of Sunbury, where an old communications bunker was rumored to still operate under government contract. The facility was buried beneath a decommissioned water tower, its entrance disguised by a rusted hatch in the forest floor. Marianne hacked the keypad using a copied code from the archive. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a metal ladder disappearing into cold, humming darkness. What they found below changed everything. Dozens of data terminals arranged in a half-circle, all active. Each one displayed a human profile, old medical scans, EEG readouts, synchronized waveform charts. Along the back wall was a rack of tapes labeled Response Phase 1 to 9. The most recent, Phase 10 active. Lyle inserted the tape. It played without sound, but the screen illuminated with a strobing spiral. Their vision blurred. The hum intensified. Both dropped to their knees. And then a burst of clarity. Not sound, not light, but understanding. The spiral was a neural pattern, a compression algorithm for consciousness. Thoughts converted into signal, memories fractured and reordered into transmit-ready data. It was a bootloader for a new type of mind. Across the room, a hidden monitor switched on. A figure appeared, grainy, ghost-like. A man in a military uniform. Major Reeve. His image was pre-recorded, but his words were chilling. If you are watching this, the respondent protocol has reached Phase 10. Integration has begun. You were never meant to find this place. But if you did, it means the signal is no longer external. It has reached the network, the biological substrate. There is no shutting it off. There is only delay. Contain yourself. Isolate thought. Do not dream. The screen went black. Silence returned. But it felt watched. Marianne turned slowly. Lyle, do you remember dreaming last night? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep inside, something had begun responding. Lyle couldn't remember leaving the bunker. One moment he was watching Major Reeve's pale echo vanish into static, and the next, he was in the passenger seat of Marianne's car, the highway lines bleeding into each other in the early morning haze. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon glowed faintly red, just like it had that night. His head throbbed. His hands trembled. But worst of all, his thoughts weren't silent anymore. They echoed, not like memories, not like inner monologue. These were feedback loops, words and images that spun in and out of meaning, not fully his. He would think of the phrase, contain yourself, and it would bounce back 5 seconds later, layered in a different tone. He would blink and see flashes, fragments of a spiral, static, trees bending, red arcs rotating above cracked soil. Marianne drove fast. Too fast. She didn't speak. They were headed to the last untouched node in the original Echo array, a microwave relay tower outside Cardington, Ohio, buried under a decommissioned weather observatory. According to Reeve's notes, this tower had remained dormant since 1965, used only once to test long-range harmonic compression, until the test was halted mid-cycle. The reason? Unexpected biological interference. When they arrived, the tower was almost gone, consumed by vines and corrosion. The observatory dome was cracked open like a broken egg, and the hatch leading below had rusted nearly shut. Lau pried it loose with a tire iron, the smell of old oil and burnt circuitry wafting up from below. Inside, they found a single console, still active. On the screen, a message was looping. Responder 04C, local echo found. Begin assimilation. Marianne froze. What's 04C? Lau swallowed. That's me. The console lit up with red lines forming across a grid. His name appeared again. Then Marianne's. Then another, William Carson. His father. The log showed something terrifying. All 3 names had been part of initial exposure batch A in 1963. His father had known, maybe even participated. The screen displayed one more message, timed like a metronome. Phase shift initiated. Biological mirror upload, 14%. Then came the worst moment of Lyle's life. He heard his own voice, broadcast from the console itself, saying a phrase he had never spoken aloud. We are not meant to survive the broadcast. We are meant to carry it. He stepped back, but the console followed. Not physically, but through sound, vibration, pressure. The room itself felt like it was collapsing into him. Marianne gripped his shoulders. They're copying us, Lyle. not as bodies, as carriers, as code. Lyle screamed as another flash hit him, clearer than before. A vision, thousands of towers, red-lit skies, a planet of silent beings, staring upward. Not Earth, not yet, but soon. He fell to the floor, twitching as the waveform completed another cycle in his mind. Outside, the red arc returned, no longer distant, no longer silent. It was here. When Lyle regained consciousness, he was no longer in the observatory. He was in a motel room off Route 23, lying on a bed with no sheets, a dried smear of blood at the edge of the mattress, and the distant flicker of a television tuned to nothing but static. The air conditioner clicked endlessly, but emitted no sound. His mouth was dry. His thoughts were louder. Marian sat in the corner, face pale, eyes glazed. She had her recorder in her lap, frozen mid-playback. "Lyle," she said slowly, "you were gone for 6 hours. Your body didn't move, but your voice kept talking. Dozens of phrases. Some in English, some in numbers. Some in things I don't think are real words. Like it was reading you." He sat up, head spinning. The last thing he remembered was the message from the tower. Then nothing. Except one image, lingering in his mind like an afterimage burned into the retina. An enormous disk, half submerged in soil, flickering between visibility and complete transparency. It wasn't flying. It was rooted like a seed. Lyle stood and walked toward the mirror. He touched the glass. For a moment, his reflection did not follow. It blinked late, then corrected itself. Something inside him was slipping. "Marianne, we need to find out who else is part of this. If this echo array used people to anchor the signal, then there must be more, other respondents. Maybe even people it's finished copying." Marianne hesitated, then opened a folder. She had compiled a list of names cross-referenced from the university records, the military memos, and strange missing persons reports in the region. 19 people, all born between July and October 1963. All from within the 70-mile radius of the original Delta III sweep. All vanished without trace over the last 15 years. "Except one," she whispered. "Name's Carl Wendell. Still alive. Lives off-grid near Marion. Only survivor from Reeves, a group." They drove in silence. The road wound through endless cornfields that now felt less like crops and more like antennae, long, stalk-like spines listening to the sky. They found Carl Wendell in a bunker beneath a burned-down farmhouse, surrounded by copper mesh, white noise machines, and walls scribbled in looping numbers. He had torn out every piece of technology except one. An old ham radio set to a frequency of precisely 1.420 megahertz. The hydrogen line. Carl's voice rasped with disuse. He barely looked at them. But when Lyle mentioned Echo Delta 3, he laughed, broken bitter. "You're hearing it now, aren't you?" he said. "Not with your ears. With your mind. That little echo behind every thought. That static behind dreams." He held up a spiral chart drawn by hand, identical to the Delta waveform. "They're not from space. They don't move through vacuum. They move through pattern, through repetition, through memory. You remember them, they remember you. And when that cycle completes..." Carl tapped the side of his head. "You're no longer the thinker. You're the echo." Marian stepped back. "How do we stop it?" Carl's eyes glistened. "You can't. But maybe you can stop them from sinking the whole array. If you sever the primary loop before 100% resonance, you scramble the signal. You break the mirror." He handed Lyle an old recording device. "Play this at the Berkshire silo. When the pulse hits peak." Lyle stared at the device. "What's on it?" Carl whispered. "Me. Before I stopped being me." The road back to Berkshire felt longer this time, as if the land itself resisted their return. The skies above remained unnaturally dim, stained with shades of orange and red not found on any spectrum chart. Birds circled in perfect, synchronized spirals, silent, mechanical. The world had begun to drift. Carl Wendell's recorder sat heavy in Lyle's lap. It was old, analog, shielded in copper mesh with a small red button labeled only with a single word scratched into the casing. Fragment. As they neared the silo, Lyle's thoughts started stuttering, looping back on themselves in subtle ways. Sentences finished before he thought them. Emotions arrived in sequence, rather than sensation. And all the while, the echo grew louder. In the passenger seat, Marianne clutched a thick notebook. It contained all her notes, frequency data, eyewitness testimonies, medical files, diagrams from Reeves' research. Every page seemed to ripple now, as though time itself was unstable near the epicenter. She turned to Lyle. "This is it. Once we play that tape, we either break the loop or they finish downloading us." The Berkshire silo loomed ahead, still quiet, still disguised, but humming now beneath the soil like a living organ. As they descended into the sub-basement, the vibration became almost unbearable. The air buzzed with pressure. The steel stairwell shrieked under their weight like it was being stretched. The terminal, long dormant, was already alive, screens glowing with spiraling patterns, lines of data cycling faster than any human could read. The waveform was no longer flat or rhythmic. It moved like a living organism, adjusting in real time, waiting. At exactly 2:53 a.m., the red arc outside reappeared, stationary, low, vast. A horizon-wide ring of pulsing light. This was the resonance window, the final alignment before completion. Lyle stepped forward, inserted the recorder. He pressed fragment. The tape spun. A tone emerged, low, unstable, not music, not language. But buried within it, a voice. Carl Wendell's voice. Not from today. From before. Clear, terrified, defiant. "You are not me. You are not my thoughts. I reject your mirror. I break the loop." As the message repeated, the waveform on the screen began to destabilize. The spirals unwound. The sync percentages dropped, 96, 87, 74. The red arc outside shuddered, expanding and contracting like a heartbeat under distress. But then, the terminal counter surged. The system began correcting itself, adapting. The waveform shifted into a new form, a shape neither Carl nor Reeve had ever seen. Something learned from Lyle, from Marianne, a hybrid, a bridge. The counter began climbing again. 62, 71, 84. The red arc pulsed harder. The ground trembled. Marianne looked at Lyle. "It's not enough. Fragmenting won't erase us. We're already inside." Lyle's face twisted with realization. "What if we reverse it?" He grabbed the mic attached to the terminal and spoke directly into it, his voice a broken echo of the signal itself. "I am not complete. I am corrupted. I reject resonance. I reject harmony. Inject noise." And then he screamed. A pure human scream, raw, flawed, chaotic. The waveform shattered. The lights exploded. The arc outside twisted violently and collapsed in on itself, folding into a point of red so dense and bright it lit the entire horizon, and then vanished. Silence. Not static. True silence. The screens went black. The humming stopped. For the first time in weeks, Lyle's thoughts were his own. No echoes. No pulses. No voice mimicking his breath. But in the ruins of the terminal, a new message blinked faintly. Flickering. Dying. Upload failed. Reconstructing pattern. They had won a moment. But the system was learning. The next morning brought a fragile calm. For the first time in days, the sky over central Ohio was gray in the way it used to be. Quiet, flat, emotionally distant but normal. The birds returned. The static was gone. Even the hum beneath the ground had ceased. But Lyle knew it wasn't over. The message on the terminal, reconstructing pattern, had remained, pulsing faintly as though the system was gathering itself, like shattered glass pulling back into shape. The collapse of the resonance arc was not a destruction, only a delay. He and Marianne left the silo in silence. Every mile they drove away, the weight in their heads lessened. But even then, there was an ache, an invisible tether still connecting them to something larger, something unfinished. By noon, they reached an abandoned fallout shelter in the woods outside Delaware, a place Carl had marked on his map before they left. Inside was a cache of tapes, manuals, and an emergency transmitter locked inside a steel box. On the box, etched with a soldier's dog tag, were 3 words. For Phase 4. Marianne opened the box. Inside was a warning, handwritten, faded with age. If integration fails, pattern may drift. Signal will attempt to rebuild using partial hosts. Those exposed to fragment pulses may retain recursive anomalies. The echo cannot be deleted. It must be diluted. Lyle sat on the cold cement floor, trying to breathe through the implications. Fragmentation had not erased the pattern. It had broken it apart, scattered it across thousands of neural signatures. Anyone who had ever come near the signal could now become a carrier. Not just him. Not just respondents. But everyone. Pattern drift, he said quietly. They've figured out how to hide in noise. Marianne scanned the last page of the manual. It detailed a defense strategy developed during the final days of the Echo project. A global frequency distortion loop. A way to jam the reconstruction by broadcasting low-strength entropy, human noise, spontaneous chaos, randomness, into the hydrogen band. They needed a tower, not a silo, not a bunker, a live one, active. Marianne had one last card to play. A pirate tower in Westerville, used by conspiracy ham radio operators and ex-defense techs who still believed the government was hiding something in the sky. If they could reach it, if they could plug the entropy loop into its amplifier, they might flood the pattern with enough cognitive dissonance to disrupt the rebuild process. Not forever, but long enough to scatter it again. Lyle looked out through the rusted steel slit of the shelter. In the distance, a school bus passed. Children laughed inside. A moment of innocence. But as it passed, Lyle's head turned, against his will. He saw one child in the back, staring, still, smiling. And as the bus rolled by, his ears picked up a subtle rhythm in the tire's rotation. 5-second intervals. Perfect spacing. A delta pattern. The signal wasn't dead. It had entered the population. Night fell over Ohio like a shroud. A storm rolled in from the west, but it brought no thunder, no lightning. Only flickering cloudbursts that lit the sky in red pulses spaced 5 seconds apart. The same pattern again. Reconstructing. Adapting. Lyle and Marianne reached the Westerville Tower just after 9 p.m. The facility wasn't much. An old relay building, half covered in ivy, with a rusted 30-foot transmission mast rising through a cracked parking lot. But it was alive, buzzing faintly. Its underground base still powered by deep storage batteries. A relic from the Cold War days when rogue signal hackers tried to jam Soviet radar. Inside, walls were lined with switchboards, wave analyzers, magnetic tape decks. And in the back, a signal repeater with direct access to the 1.420 MHz hydrogen line. It was enough. Lyle placed the entropy loop drive, taken from Carl Wendel's emergency kit, into the repeater input. The moment it activated, the screens exploded in noise. Random numbers, laughter, screams, coughing fits, broken songs. A child asking why the moon was following her. A woman repeating, "I forgot my name," in 6 different tones. Pure, unfiltered human chaos. Voices stolen from field recorders, emergency lines, corrupted radio shows. The opposite of the echo pattern. Where echo was symmetry, this was noise. Where echo was harmony, this was conflict. The repeater shuddered. The tower outside groaned. The transmission began. A counter on the wall ticked upward. Seconds into the broadcast, 12, 23, 48. Lyle turned to Marianne. "We need at least 2 full minutes. That's the saturation threshold from Reeves' model." But before she could answer, the room dimmed. Not from power loss, but from presence. Lyle felt it first. A pressure behind his eyes, the subtle twist of his own reflection watching him from inside his mind. The waveform, buried deep in his thoughts, was being agitated, pushed into distress. The signal inside him was waking up. Then the air crackled. The tower's lights blinked. And a voice rang through the transmission. Low, soft, synthetic. Entropy detected. Sync disruption in progress. Realigning host. The terminal glowed. Lyle's name appeared again. Responder 04C. Biological anchor. Attempting override. He doubled over in pain. A low hum echoed in his skull. Every thought began repeating, degrading, distorting. Marianne ran to him, trying to hold him upright. "Lyle, listen to me, don't let it in." But it was already in. And it was angry. On the screen, lines of code scrolled faster than either of them could read. Then the room vibrated, and outside, the tower's top beacon exploded in red fire. Still, the broadcast kept running. 71 seconds. 84, 96. Lyle, now on his knees, grabbed the repeater mic. He screamed into it. Not words, but chaos. Cracking his knuckles into the mic, gasping. Guttural noise. A human heartbeat slammed against a digital wall. And then came the final push. "I am noise," he roared. "I am not a signal." The waveform collapsed. On every screen, every dial, every sensor, the echo pattern split. Broke. Reversed. The signal began eating itself, folding into recursive instability. Data corrupted. The sync protocol failed. The repeater burned out. The tower sparked and died. Outside, the red arc above the clouds imploded in silence, folding inward like crumpled paper. vanishing in a dim flash that left the sky pitch black. No pulse, no rhythm, no echo, just rain, real rain. But then, in the broken static of the repeater, one line blinked faintly, barely visible. Noise archived. Phase 5 ready. It rained for 3 straight days. Not the unnatural, pulsing humidity that had clung to central Ohio like a veil, but real weather. Cold, cleansing, the kind that rattled windows and blurred the horizon into a wash of slate gray and wet soil. The skies held no red arcs, no flickers of unnatural light, but below the surface something lingered. Lyle and Marianne remained in hiding. The tower was gone, charred to black steel and shattered plastic. The entropy loop had burned through the repeater's processor and melted half the backup systems. There would be no forensic analysis, no proof of what had happened, just silence. Lyle stopped dreaming, not because he was at peace, but because something inside him had gone quiet. The mirror was broken, but the reflection had left a scar. Every now and then, he would say something and not remember saying it. A phrase, a tone, a reaction that didn't feel fully his. He began keeping a recorder by his bed, just in case the echo tried to return. Marianne continued her research. She posted nothing online. She made no broadcasts. But she did find something. A final classified file Carl had hidden behind an encryption key embedded in the entropy tape. It was a projection, a behavioral model compiled by Major Reeve. If the echo signal fails to synchronize via full pattern resonance, it will adapt by embedding into cultural rhythm instead. Myth, story, belief. It will no longer need hardware. It will use memory as its antenna, fear as its carrier. Final directive: ensure the truth becomes unbelievable. Turn the real into legend. Marianne closed the file. They understood, then, what had to be done. They wouldn't try to warn the world. They wouldn't fight the spread. They would corrupt the narrative. Bury the truth in fiction, cloak it in rumor. Let the signal degrade beneath the weight of disbelief. Lyle recorded the last tape himself. A version of the story filled with half-truths, contradictions, vague details. He called it the Berkshire Signal. He mailed copies to conspiracy forums, paranormal radio shows, amateur SETI enthusiasts. Some would call it a hoax. Others would forget it. A few would obsess. And in doing so, they would scatter the pattern even further. They wouldn't stop the signal, but they would make it stutter. And that might be enough. Epilogue. 6 months later, in a quiet hospital in North Carolina, a child was born during a routine blackout. No complications. No anomalies. Except one. When the nurse held the baby against the mother's chest, the infant did not cry. Instead, it hummed. A perfect 5-second tone. The lights flickered. And across the room, a monitor blinked to life, though no one had touched it. The screen displayed one line. Responder 11A recognized. Drift phase initiated. The echo never ended. It simply changed hosts.